This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. In just a moment, I'm going to be joined by Robert Sheaffer, and we're putting together a program today that deals with, I guess, the latest information about UAP, starting with 2017's articles by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, where it's gone, what is the congressional reaction to it, what is the skeptical community thinking about it. I will be taking the side of the UFO community, suggesting that I'm not real thrilled about it either. And we'll be discussing what we see is wrong, what we see is right, and what we might be able to offer in the way of suggestions of where they need to go. As I say, I am joined by Robert Sheaffer, who is a writer with a lifelong interest in astronomy and the question of life on other planets. He is one of the leading skeptical investigators of UFOs, now UAP, a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquirer, cleverly known as CSI, and has written the Psychic Vibration column in the Skeptical Inquirer for over 35 years. He is a founding director and past chairman of the Bay Area Skeptics. He has written books on a variety of paranormal topics, has appeared on many television and radio shows over the years, and his book, Bad UFOs, is of interest to all of us here. Welcome to A Different Perspective, Robert.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. Glad to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. Initial reaction to the first stories about the UFOs, UAPs that came out in 2017 and the video, the Navy cockpit video. What was your initial reaction to those?
Well, we know that it just sort of jumped up. It's how it seemed to be. And this got involved not just Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. Of course, Leslie Kean was already very well known in the UFO community because she wrote her book, what was it called? Generals and something, government officials and generals go on the record about UFOs. She, wrote a whole lot of, cases that had already been pretty well explained in the skeptical literature, but she just ignored the explanations, and which is kind of par for the course for a lot of well-known ufologists.
Well, let's back up for just a moment. You say she used an awful lot of things that have been pretty well debunked. Give me one example of that.
Okay, I'm going to have to go to my over here, my blog, and
well, I was just thinking if there was something on the top of your head that you thought might have been debunked that she was talking about. I know a lot of the cases she reported on had already been reported on by other UFO investigators, and that there wasn't a lot of surprises in there. So I just wondered if there was something that leaped to mind there that she had reported on that in your mind had been pretty well debunked.
Well, one of them isn't specifically in her book, but this business about the UFO video from Chile that was in fact in almost everybody's analysis except hers, it was a fly. In other words, that she was, the video came from somebody down in Chile, and they said she said it's moving so fast, thousands of miles an hour, but that depends on how far it is from the camera, So that if it's close to the camera, maybe it is moving thousands of miles, or it's much less. But if it's distant, like she says it is, then it is moving much faster. But
so well, I know from personal experience, I had a on one of my security cameras had a white blob that lifted up. It looked like from the vacant lot across the street. And there's nothing over there. There's no lights or anything there. It looked like a white blob. And I was kind of puzzled by this. And I asked a number of people about it. And they said, that's a spider crawling over the lens.
Yeah.
I looked at it again and you could kind of see the web. And the deer I thought was in front of the object you could see part of the web now on the deer when you looked at it closely. So when you're looking at those kind of videos, you have to take into account it may be something very close to it.
Yeah.
I'm convinced.
Also the videos from the so-called Skinwalker Ranch that is supposed to show spooky orbs and whatever, when Stephen Greenstreet was out there and he got some videos. And basically it was the same thing. There are spiders and things stuck in spider webs, and but they attribute them to paranormal causes. But getting back to Leslie Kean and to the New York Times article, that they had, I think it was the first two. It was the Tic Tac that they were talking about, and then did they have the second one yet or not at that time? I don't recall. But then there were a couple of more articles. Then there were the three well-known videos, and we heard all this new information about a supposed Pentagon UFO investigation program called AATIP, and supposedly it was headed up by Luis Elizondo. And we heard about, what was it, supposed to be $22 million or some such thing. Well, that story is so, jumbled up and incorrect. As we now know, that the $22 million did indeed go to somebody to study something, but it was through the machinations of Harry Reid, who at that time was the Democratic leader in the Senate, and then he managed to get the money to go to Bigelow, Robert Bigelow, who is this millionaire investor who is now big on UFOs and life after death and things like this. And so, but it turns out that the story, as we've heard it, of Elizondo supposedly getting that money and being in charge of, how it was spent and so on, is not accurate.
Well, let me break in, because we're talking about the Navy videos, the Tic Tac. There was one called Fast Mover, and I forget what the other one was called.
Well, one was Go Fast, the Tic Tac, and then the other one was Gimbal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're talking about here, is those first videos that were presented, and everybody was suggesting, well, this is really great because the Navy is finally admitted to UFOs, but it really was, they were verifying, yes, this was Navy video, not what the subject of the video was. It was kind of a subtle distinction there. Right.
And actually what's seldom noted is that we don't have the actual original video of this. What we have is apparently pilot had his cell phone with him and took a cell phone video of the screen that was from with the underlying data. I mean, if we could get the full underlying data and the full, original video, that would be interesting. I don't think there's anything spooky going on here. Almost certainly, the gimbal and the Tic Tac are distant jets. And Mick West has actually done an awful lot of looking into this. He did a software program. He's former video game programmer, and this involves being able to set up frames of, reference, and you're trying to create an image, a video in the game. But you take the same techniques and you take a video that you already have, and then you try to figure out exactly what's the distance to the object and so on, based on what information you have. And I don't think there's any reasonable doubt we're seeing these distant jets in infrared.
Let me interrupt here, because I do have a question. What you're suggesting is we do not have the original cockpit video. We have the video from a cell phone that one of the pilots took off the
that's my
display.
Yes.
So
we really don't have a very good high resolution image of any of these.
Well, I think in today's environment with the equipment that's available, if we had the original image, we probably could identify or not identify it
Yeah.
pretty easily.
No, I agree with you. If we could get this, like I said, it would be a very interesting. It gives a lot to study. And there have been other. I mean, if you can, people have found other videos of distant jets in similar situations, and they look the same on this infrared cameras.
Well, I have talked to some of the people who were involved in reporting or observing some of these things, Navy personnel, suggesting that not only were the sensors displaying these things, but they were also making visual sightings. So it's not only the instrumentality involved, but also personal observations by members of the crew.
Right, but these are scattered all around. In other words, the jet that went up where what was his name, Lieutenant Fravor was it, who first saw the reported seeing the Tic Tac. The video we have is not what he saw because it was an hour or two later, and these incidents that you're talking about that the people are saying, you know, back on the ship, you know, they might go out at night and see a meteor or something and then say, well, okay, that was it, we saw it. These things get very complicated sometimes, you know, and when that happens, it all gets mixed together. Like you talk about the Phoenix Lights, the famous Phoenix Lights of 1997, really two separate incidents. One, the first one was almost certainly was a flight of was it A-10s that were coming in to land at what was Davis Monthan Air Force Base. Second incident involved a flare drop in the gunnery range or in the military operations area. But all the news reports, conflate the two of them. They'll talk about one and then they'll talk about the triangle of supposed objects, and then they'll show you a photo of the other and with no explanation. So I'm saying that when a UFO case reaches a certain, should we say, critical mass, then it just gets all jumbled together in the news reports and in many of the books and the articles also. So that makes it very hard to actually get a clear account of what happened.
Well, I'm going to have to take a quick break here. When we come back, I think we should move on to the upshot of this, which was the congressional interest in the investigations that they have launched or apparently launched or pretended to launch. Robert's book is, his website is www.badufos.com, badufos.com. It's all one word. And he's got a book was also called Bad UFOs. And what he did was explain some of these things in the skeptical terms. And I think some of the stuff is pretty well researched. We'll be back right after this. I'm joined by Robert Sheaffer. We were talking about the incidents that kind of sparked all the recent interest in UFOs, or UAP as they now call them. I was of the impression that the 3 videos that were released earlier that we talked about a little bit had been pretty well explained by technological glitches in the equipment. I saw a YouTube video where a guy had hooked his cell phone camera to night vision goggles and got a wonderful spinning pyramid-shaped object recorded on his cell phone. And it looked an awful lot like some of the videos that we'd seen recently from them. But this sparked a congressional interest or public interest in UFOs, and we ended up with a organization known as Arrow. Did you do much research into that? Have you watched many of the interviews done by those people or the congressional investigations? Did you watch any of that stuff yourself?
Not very much of it. Started out a little bit. This could be interesting, and then less and less interesting, and then it was more apparent that there's really nothing here, and we're just hearing the same sort of stories that we've been hearing for decades, and so looking for something new. Maybe we don't even have names really to associate with many of these claims of secret. What I forget the term they were using, but basically I suppose crash saucer investigations and whatever. Oh, I did want to mention before we on the previous subject, the Go Fast video. This is the one. It looks like a little round thing. You're looking down at the ocean from the aircraft, and it appears to be going backwards at a tremendous rate of speed. And wow, that's a Go Fast. Look at that thing move. Well, if it was a balloon or a bird moving slowly, it maybe 40 miles an hour or less, and the aircraft is going forward at 400 miles an hour, they didn't seem to realize that what's that going to look like? You've got your ocean, down here, and you've got your object here in the aircraft going zoom. It's going to look like the object is going zooming back in the other direction. I mean, this is just simple geometry. And yet our investigators, the first congressional investigation was not able to solve that. I guess they've now agreed that explanation is correct, and that the Go Fast object is basically hanging still more or less, or moving very slowly in the air as the aircraft approaches it and passes it at a very high rate of speed. And you'd think they would have realized this.
Well, to be fair to the congressional people who were doing the investigation, they did not have access to all the information we have now. You see the video and it looks astonishing.
Yeah.
If you don't understand the geometry or the physics of the situation, you can be fooled by it. Kind of like the blob across the street didn't realize it was a spider crawling across the lens of the camera. Wasn't aware that those things happened. So
yeah, something like that. Now you mentioned these green objects, and we've seen the supposed triangle UFOs. It's also fooled the first congressional, or not congressional, but the first government investigators to look at this. And they say, well, these are triangular objects that were hovering over the ship and moving and so on. No, that particular model of a night vision device, because of a phenomenon known as bokeh, or however you say it, that basically the image of like a star-like object on the film plane or on the virtual film plane is the same shape as the lens or the enclosure. In this case, it's not round because of the what do they call it? Like the iris to try to shrink it down there. That in this case it was a triangular shape because that was the blades of the iris were in that shape, and so but they attributed this to the objects themselves, and so again it went off on a big tangent that proves nothing. It just proves that so many of these supposedly knowledgeable investigators can't tell an airplane and the planet Jupiter when they see it.
I think back to the old days of the video cameras when we first were getting the video cameras, and you would get images. They would say we saw this object hovering in the sky, and it had sort of a Batman signal type shape to it. And you look at it and you find out that was an artifact created in the camera because of the way the irises and the lenses were working together. So it wasn't really a Batman signal. It was just a star. Or in the one case I know of, it was Venus, because they said, well, we watched it for about 2 hours and it just finally faded away. And I'm thinking, yeah, Venus probably set, or the sun came up and washed it out. But I know that those sorts of things happen, but we become, and I say we, a lot of the investigators in the UFO committee have become aware of that, so we can eliminate those things immediately.
Right, and that's good.
See, I think what you're saying there is it's sort of the same phenomenon that produced that pyramid shape or triangular shaped object.
Yeah, exactly.
Glitch in the
they have not come to that conclusion. Also, the government AARO or whatever it is.
But should we trust everything that the official investigators are saying? Because there was a congressional interview of two Pentagon spokespeople, and one of the congressional members asked about the Malmstrom Air Force Base incident, And the investigators said, well, I don't know anything about that. We've not heard anything about that. This is, of course, the missile shutdown at Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967, where there were UFO sightings around the base at the same time, just giving the audience a bit of a background here. And I was astonished that the investigators said, well, we don't know anything about it. And here's this congressional representative who knew about it and was asking them what they thought about it. And eventually the guy said, well, we do know something about it. So they were kind of caught off guard by the question and suggested that maybe they were being less than candid in their responses.
I'm not sure about that. A guy might have just been trying to make it like a CYA move to not look so completely out of it. I mean, it's hard to know.
Well,
I really think that if anything dramatic along the lines of crash recovery, we keep hearing stories about crash recovery projects. If there were any substance to any of them, it would have leaked out long, long ago.
well, I could make the point that it has leaked out, but that's a whole other argument. What I wanted to ask to you, since you brought up the crash retrievals,
Yeah.
we had David Grush making all these claims last summer. I'm sure you're aware of those. What was your opinion of what he had to say in his congressional testimonies and the interviews that he had conducted?
Well, at first I thought he might have some new information, but once he'd gone on for a while, it's obvious that this is just a rehash of everything that's been said before. Who is it? David Kimbian, I think, has been keeping track of how many days it's been since Grush first came forward and said, I have this amazing information. And it's been more than a year, and we still don't have any specifics. When you say it has leaked out, well, your rumors have leaked out, but anything that's factual, anything that can be verified as far as a government project, no, there is nothing like that. So,
were you aware of the 1933 UFO crash that Grush had mentioned?
I had not heard of it beforehand, but I looked it up, as I'm sure did many other people, and apparently this was something that is one of these stories that have been circulating in Italy among the UFO community there. But again, when you try to make to get facts to support it, there aren't any. And there is one supposed document or something that mentions it, but then somebody has analyzed the document and said this is not authentic. So essentially, they're saying, Mussolini had his saucer. Well, if Hitler, everybody knows the Nazis had flying saucers, right? So if Hitler had a flying saucer, why couldn't Mussolini have one, right?
Well, I think what's important, I hadn't heard about it either until he mentioned it. And I sort of made a side issue of looking at crash retrieval stories. And I think that the vast majority of them are single witness or easily disproven. And I hadn't heard about that. But colleagues in Italy who had looked into it sent me their documentation and said the museum that was supposedly mentioned in it didn't exist. The archives didn't exist. The library didn't have any knowledge of it. And it struck me as it was an Italian attempt to come up with MJ-12. It all kind of looked like the same thing we got with MJ-12. Well, here's this document, and here's this, and here's that. And you couldn't get to original sources. You couldn't find the documentation. You couldn't verify the information at all. It just looked like that at me. But I think the point is, I contacted colleagues in Italy who are more on my side of the fence than yours. And their conclusion was that it was a hoax. And I'm thinking that if you're on the inside with all this information that you've allegedly got, you would have known that early on, because it took me almost 30 minutes to learn the truth after you talked about that. And I was surprised by that 1933 comment.
Yeah, I don't think he's even very well. He didn't. How should I say it? To get his information consistent, he didn't. I don't think checking one and seeing if there's any common elements and seeing if there's anything that looks more plausible or less plausible, seems there should be analysis performed, and I don't think he's really doing any analysis. I think he is just repeating stories he hears. There's interesting speculations about, well, who are his sources? Some people are saying that the sources are basically just Bigelow's, people who work with Bigelow on AWSAP and so on, Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff and people like this, and that Grush is just getting these stories from them and then repeating them. I don't know where he's getting his stories from, but
well, I understand. I understand that he had been out to Skinwalker Ranch, and Bigelow, of course, owned Skinwalker Ranch at one point. I don't know if he still does.
No, that's a whole new story about what's his name, the businessman from Salt Lake City, and now they've got a whole series of 5 seasons or something of Skinwalker Ranch where they photograph a likeness guy and say, "Oh, there's a helicopter flying over. That must be the CIA or somebody watching us." And somebody.
Well, let me break you. We're going to come back. We're going to come back to this because I think Skinwalker Ranch is an important link to what Grush was talking about. And I think Grush was being perfectly honest in what he said. He was told these stories and believed them because he made it clear that he was a secondhand witness. And I'm thinking, yeah, so am I. I can give you all kinds of names of people who've told me these stories as well. It's getting the proof that is an important part of the whole investigation. Once again, your website is badufos.com. Mine is kevinrandle.blogspot.com. I did a book called Crash When UFOs Fall from the Sky. A lot of the crash UFO stories are in there, and you can see my analysis and my investigation into them as well. I will be back right after this with Robert Sheaffer talking about UAPs. And I am back with Robert Sheaffer. We were talking, I guess, a little bit about Skinwalker Ranch, which becomes important in understanding David Grush's claims of 12 recoveries. And some of the people that you mentioned, Robert, such as Chris Mellon and Puthoff, and these people have been to Skinwalker Ranch, and that puts Grush in contact with them, and they are spinning these tales. In fact, Mellon just released, and I don't know if you saw it, a email which was redacted, partially redacted, suggesting that the Kingman, Arizona crash may be real. And I do not believe that for a moment, but I think this is where Grush got his information. So he heard these people talking about it. So he knows nothing firsthand. He hasn't observed the stuff himself. He's repeating what he had heard. Are you familiar with the Kingman story at all?
I know that about 5 years ago or so, MUFON kind of adopted that as the case of the year for their symposium in the summer. Each was in July. They have a MUFON symposium somewhere. And I know they were promising big revelations and this and that. And I guess somebody presented something, but nobody was very impressed. I don't know a lot, the specifics of it. Kingman is about halfway between Las Vegas and the Grand Canyon. It's out there in
it's in northern Arizona.
Right.
And the story came from a guy named Arthur Stansel, who apparently was stationed in Nevada at one point at what was Indian River Air Force Base or whatever. It's now got a different name, but he was supposedly recruited to help investigate a UFO crash, and he speculated it was near Kingman, Arizona.
Oh, he didn't know where it was, but he helped to investigate it.
Well, they flew, and this makes no sense to me. They flew them from this base in just north of Las Vegas to Phoenix, put them on a bus, and then drove them for 4 hours. I'm thinking, why not drive them down from Las Vegas? They could have gotten there a lot quicker because it's like 90 miles from Las Vegas.
Right.
So
I did, as far as the Skinwalker, I looked it up. It was in 2016 that Bigelow sold the ranch to Adamantium Corporation or something, which I guess is some science fiction name or Marvel superhero name or some such thing of an element. But of course, it's Brandon Fugel is the businessman from Salt Lake City who is now the owner. And I got to say, it must have been a very, very wise investment because they're now on their 5th season of a TV show. Now, if you want to make money in the paranormal, UFOs, or anything like that nowadays, you make a little off books. I can't think of anybody who has probably made a substantial sum of money off of books. But if you can get a TV show, remember Tom DeLonge had a TV show for 2 years. It was on the so-called History Channel or one of those, and then now there's even something called Blind Frog Ranch, which I know next to nothing about, except that geographically it's close to Skinwalker Ranch, and the Blind Frog Ranch is haunted too or something, and it's got these tunnels that supposedly go somewhere spooky. But I think that's only on its second season now.
Well, I'm thinking,
that's how you make money.
I'm thinking that if there's all this haunting going on in that area of Utah, maybe we should stay away from
it. Maybe.
But I think the real point, though, is the Skinwalker Ranch has been visited by the cast of characters you would expect to have visited it, and that would have put Grush into contact with him. I did a posting on my blog guessing what the 12 UFO crashes that Grush would be talking about. Of course, knowing that one of them was Italy and one of them was Roswell, because he'd mentioned those publicly. But what would some of the others be? And I based it on what had gotten publicity and what seemed like it had some interesting information around it. I don't remember if I put Kingman on it or not, but I'm thinking based on what I was able to guess and what I've heard going around the UFO committee, what it might have been. I was able to put together a list of 10 or 12 crashes that I think that might be the ones he was talking about. But the key here is the connection, which I believe is that Grush had been at Skinwalker Ranch 1 or 2 times, and that would have put him into touch with the people that we've been kind of talking about too, who seem to believe these stories without much in the way of evidence at all, but they talk about the reality of them.
Has this been confirmed that Grush did visit Skinwalker, or is that just
I have not confirmed it to a 100% satisfaction, but I believe it's true. I believe that he was there, that he has
been secondhand, to talk to the people who were there, Eric Davis and so on, the people who were working with Bigelow. But again, it's because the speculation is where did he get these stories from? Of course, if you recall, us old timers in ufology remember Leonard Stringfield, who MUFON guy, who starting in the 70s and continuing at least through the 90s, he was collecting all these different stories about supposed UFO crashes, and he had, I don't know, something like 40 supposedly independent sources for these things, but of course no facts. And here we are decades later, and still none of the Stringfield cases have been shown to be authentic.
Well, in defense of Len Stringfield, what he was doing was collecting the tales, as you said, and he wasn't sure, and he was publishing it. He was publishing it in the hopes that somebody else would pick it up and run with it and be able to come up with information. But his information, specifically the Robert Willingham story about the Del Rio crash, which, by the way, appears in the MJ12 papers, it was information that he had in his status reports that helped me verify that Robert Willingham was not telling the truth. I also attempted to get Willingham's service record, got Willingham's service record. He claimed to be a retired Air Force colonel. He had spent 13 months in the Army and he was discharged as an E4, not exactly a colonel, but Len was talking about the evolution of his story and suggesting it might not be real. So Len investigated some of it. He did provide commentary on what he thought was a good case or where things may have gone off. So I say that in defense of Len because I know what he was doing. Rather than I'm collecting these stories and putting in a file cabinet to build up, I guess, my log of UFO crashes, but he was publishing the information as it came to him. One of his sources, by the way, for one of the crashes was Ray Fowler on the Kingman crash.
No, I wasn't trying to criticize Stringfield because, like you said, he was just collecting information and publishing stories and such. And then the question of whether to believe any of these is separate. But getting back to Skinwalker, I wanted to point out what Stephen Greenstreet of the New York Post has. He actually got invited to go out there and spend some time and talk to the people and so on. And of course, he didn't find anything spooky out there, but his investigations are showing that the money, the $22 million that went from the Pentagon because of Harry Reid to Bigelow's organization were not really, they didn't use it to study UFOs as they claimed. They were mostly studying Skinwalker Ranch. It may have been a little sliver of that had some UFO stuff, but they were, if you look at the papers, we have, the papers that they wrote, and they're more, aligned to that sort of thing rather than UFO specifics.
Well, my understanding was that some of that $22 million went to Bigelow to research anti-gravity propulsion systems too.
That's right. That was part of what it was. And, if you get the list of the first 23 papers, what do they call them, DIRDs or something, technical papers on spooky stuff. But yeah, like you said, anti-gravity and, this sort of thing is based on what, they thought they were learning there at the Skinwalker. But so it's, yeah, it's rather funny when you look at the book by, now James Lukatsky was the guy who was like on the Pentagon end of the study of AAW SAP, and then Bigelow, one of Bigelow's people, I forget who it was in charge of managing his end of the contract, and they jointly written a book called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, in which they really go into a lot of this and talk about, the work at Skinwalker Ranch and how that tied in with the money that, with the investigations that were done by this group. And in fact, they have a long list at the end of all kinds of.
Well, let's move back to the current investigations. What did you think about NASA being saddled, tasked with studying UFOs, UAP?
Well, didn't that happen, I don't know, 40 years ago or something, and it didn't go anywhere, and then they shut it down?
My understanding was they weren't tasked with it. They were asked if they wanted to do it, and their attitude was, no, we really don't care to. And which I thought was kind of a bizarre position for an organization that deals with space, not wanting to even look at the information about some sorts of space travel. So.
Well, maybe they didn't believe it really had anything to do with space and more to do with psychology, in which case the decision makes a little more sense.
But the point is now they've been tasked with it, and there was a big meeting last summer. We had a big long dais with a whole bunch of people talking about what we're going to do and how we're going to investigate and how it's going to be different and how we're going to access this. And at this point, all we know is how they're going to investigate. We don't know what they've done or what they've learned or if they've even done anything.
Right. Yeah, and I liked your point, about how if there's really anything to investigate, because that's really the main question. And how would you invest? What's going to be different, really, is the question. People have been trying to investigate. Yeah, I mean, we know Ellen Hynek had a Center for UFO Studies, and they were going to do scientific investigations. And there was this guy, Harley Rutledge, out in Missouri, and he was, I forget, was he a physicist or something? And he had a group that was going to do similar investigations. And of course, you've got stuff going on in France, and you've got investigations in South America, but nobody ever finds anything that's certain of anything that's unusual, unexpected, or spooky, and but really substantiated, not just rumored.
What would you look at? And we'll have to answer the question when we come back, because I know we're getting close to the commercial break here. But what would you want in the way of evidence? What would change your mind if it was presented? Think about that for a moment. And I'll make a couple of comments here about your book was Bad UFOs. The website is badufos.com. Mine, of course, is kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And some of the things we're talking about right now, if you go to the blog, there's a search engine and you type in a keyword and it'll bring up all the postings I've made on that particular topic. Like Kingman, there's a number of those as well. My book, Crash When UFOs Fall from the Sky, probably is relevant to the discussion as well. We'll be back right after this, so please stick around. And we are back with Robert Sheaffer. I will comment here. I do not know why I bother making notes for the program, because the discussion never goes the direction I assume it's going to go. It's kind of like the old military thing. When the first shot is fired, the plan goes out the window. Right. Anyway, when we went away, I had suggested that I would like to know what you would like to see in the way of evidence, short of maybe a captured craft, which would end the discussion at that point.
Yes.
But what kind of evidence would you be looking for that we might be able to find as we go out in our UFO investigations?
Well, that commercial we just saw with the aliens in it, that's pretty good evidence. I think for me, the key word would be redundancy. In other words, independent. How many people independently saw it? How many people independently photographed it? Did those people have any connections with each other beforehand? And so on. We tend not to get this, except in cases like a balloon or something, or some kind of a, lighter than air ship goes across the someplace where there's like a sporting event or something going on. Thousands of people see it. Some people think it's a UFO and they report it as such, and then very quickly, no, that was a Goodyear blimp or something like that. So,
well, I will point out one of the best examples of what you're saying there was the Zond 4 re-entry back in 1968, where there were an awful lot of people who saw it and knew exactly what it was, but there were a number of people who said, well, it was a cigar-shaped craft crashing to Earth.
Right.
And so we were able to say, no, it's the re-entry of a spacecraft as opposed to anything alien.
We knew when it was the spacecraft re-entered, and so we were able to tie those together. But you see, now that's happened more recently with this, what's in Pennsylvania, the Kecksburg supposedly crashed, supposedly recovered by the military and all this. But we know exactly what it was. It was a very brilliant meteorite, I guess it hit the ground, that was seen by many people across a path of 300 miles all at the same time. And there were a number of photos of it and so on. So we know the object was there. But then some people said, well, but no, it crashed near our town and the military was out here. But there were several towns that said it crashed by our town. So, has the status of one of the great pillars of ufology today, the Kecksburg, and yet it really is. We know what it was. It was they call it the Great Lakes Fireball of what was the year?
December 9th, 1965, I think.
Very good, something like that. Yes.
But to be fair, the military did respond with 3 people from a Pittsburgh radar station went out to take a look at it. So there was some of that going on. I mean, it's not like it was made up out of whole cloth.
No, but they took what was relatively uninteresting and relatively ordinary happening and tried to turn it into something extraordinary. And that's what the problem is here.
Was there ever any remains of this fireball found on the ground?
I don't think so, because I think it was supposed to have disappeared or have sunk over Lake Huron or something like that, one of the Great Lakes, I think. But even if it were or were not, is not a definitive question, because not every meteor, even very bright meteors, can burn up completely, or burn up into such small pieces that that it'll never be found, never be recovered.
Well, I'll also mention here that not all meteors create a crater when they hit the Earth either. They kind of scatter debris all over the ground. So,
well, a lot of them, they just simply burn up, break up into tiny little ashes and pieces, and still up in miles up in the atmosphere. And so the all likelihood of this one fell into Lake Huron, because that's where it was when they think. But even if it fell over the ground, what are the odds of finding some ashes on the ground if it's 100-mile stretch and you don't know exactly where it was, and so on.
Well, the answer is somebody with a magnet can find those pieces.
Well, I suppose
that's another argument.
I have to go everywhere to find it.
But from what I understand, you're saying if we had a mass sighting and there were independent photographs of this UFO, you would find that as very persuasive evidence.
Right. In fact, just within the last few weeks, I saw something being posted on social media about a UFO that supposedly was seen by large numbers of people who were at some rock concert or something like that out in the desert somewhere. And but apparently none of those people had a cell phone. So I think that by itself is enough to.
I'm not sure. I think it was over Red Rocks, which is an amphitheater outside of the Denver, Colorado, or near Morrison, Colorado.
It might have been it. Yeah.
But the theater, they were preparing the venue for the concert, and it was a dozen or so people who had seen it.
But did any of them get photos?
And they did have their cell phones, but by the time they got them engaged, the object was gone. At least is the story as I understand it.
If that's the case, if that's accurate, then very likely it was just a meteor.
I think it was in sight, I think, for like 30 seconds or so.
Well, that's possible.
And these people were at work and startled by this thing. If it had lasted a minute and a half, we probably would have some good photographs.
Oh well.
But we don't, so it really doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah. In fact, you would expect quite a variety of different photographs. People have different now. Of course, I suppose now not too many people carry around cameras, but almost everybody has a cell phone. There'd be different kinds of cell phones, different, because all these camera apps are different, and that would add, I think, some credibility to it. And in some cases, you might even have well, we've got a lot of surveillance cameras now also, anti-crime, traffic surveillance, lots, and in some cases, all sky cameras. A number of observatories have that today, even private observatories. It's not that difficult to set up an all sky camera, and it's on the internet. You can check it anytime, it'll record, and so on. So if we saw something that was not only reported visually, but then was photographed by a whole lot of people who were independent of each other on the cell phones, and it was also picked up on these surveillance cameras, I say, hell, that is something real. What is it? I don't know, but it's definitely something real.
Well, the only problem I have with my security cameras is they're motion activated.
Oh,
so I'm not going to get a flying saucer or a
unless it comes right up and waves at you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But you would accept that. What about metallic debris? If somebody had a piece of metallic debris that was analyzed,
it would have to be really, really good in the sense of have to be very solidly established that is not of terrestrial origin. And there have been a number of claims, quite a few claims of these things, going back quite a number of years. Even what was his name? The guy at IBM, Marcel Vogel, supposedly had some metallic debris that he had found or acquired somehow, that being analyzed by means of, I think it was an isotope analysis or something, to prove that this was not terrestrial. But then one of the skeptics was who happened to work with those same machines, he's a physicist, they looked at that and said, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. So, and it's a claim I don't think he's ever come up again. Marcel Vogel, this would have been, I don't know, 40 years ago or something, 35 years ago. So,
well, my fear has always been that we would get an honest to God piece of metallic debris from a flying saucer, and we take it into the lab and they analyze it and says, yeah, it's aluminum. You know, there's nothing to distinguish it from earth-based metals.
Yeah, they could. Yeah, I mean, aluminum should be the same pretty much anywhere in the universe, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought as well. Well, listen, Robert, we're just about out of time here. Anything you'd like to add in the last couple of minutes here?
Oh, well, I should have thought about that first. I think what we're seeing is that the excitement over Grush and some of these other people and these so-called revelations. At first, it was like a fever pitch a year and a half ago, and then it's just been gradually cooling down and cooling down. There were some political reporters who I think should have had better sense, who got in on this a little bit, and they said, "Oh, it must really be something here." And now I don't hear any of that. So I think they've gradually realized that this is, it's just same old repeating stories. Show us something solid, whether it's metallic and indubitably extraterrestrial, or whether it's, like we said, a whole collection of photographs and videos and things like that, all consistent and all not, could not be.
I've always argued for multiple chains of evidence.
Right.
Photographs, visual observation, maybe a radar track, maybe
Right.
some other kind of sensor picking it up would be a valuable way of studying this. And I know some of that's being done. Frank Ridge and his MADAR network is attempting to gather some of that data through instrumentality as opposed to just visual observation by people. Anyway, Robert, thank you so much for taking an hour to chat with us here, and wish you the best. And once again, that was Robert Sheaffer. His book is Bad UFOs, and his website is cleverly called badufos.com. You can take a look at that. Once again, mine is kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And the things we were talking about today, the investigations, the NASA meeting from last year and all of that, there are analyses of that on the blog. I mean, I sat through those things when they were broadcast over the internet. I watched those things and were crashingly bored by doing so. But the one thing it seemed to me was they were all reporting on what they're going to do or how they're going to do it or how they're going to coordinate with other agencies. And when we get down to it, we really don't get anything that tells us much of what was going on. I guess Sean Kirkpatrick had done a 64-page report recently. There is multiple errors in it, meaning that he didn't have any idea of what the history of the ufology was, which is maybe not that important. But I think before you study something like this, when you're doing a scientific research project, one of the first things you do is look at the history to see what has been published before, see where people have what people have done before, so you don't duplicate that effort. And I didn't see a lot of that. So where we are today is probably where we were 5-6 years ago, before all of this interest in the name change to UAP came about. As I say, one of the books that would be relevant to this discussion today would UFO crash when UFOs fall from the sky. There's like 118 different instances of UFO crashes mentioned in that book. I think very few of them, maybe one or two of them, are actual cases that deserve more investigation. Kingman being one of them. And next week, I'm going to try to do more about Kingman, so we have a better idea of what all of this stuff going on is. So anyway, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next week.